Hello, hello, and welcome to the Rock Metal Podcast. I'm your host, John Harris, and today on the Rock Metal Podcast, we have Kalen Austin out of Australia, Brisbane, who is a modern hard-hitting metal producer, and we got in contact because I just finished chatting with your band, The Stranger, and the PR agency in charge of that said, by the way, you do these like industry insider chats. Would you want to chat with the metal producer who did this? And I thought, yes, I do. so
right on, man.
Yeah. So welcome to the show, Kalen.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me, man. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. Now you mentioned it's 2 a.m. I'm guessing that's because you just finished in the studio.
Yeah, short. Something like that, man. Yeah, I apologize to anyone that's listening. I'm definitely not firing on all cylinders right now. It's very late, but you got to do what you got to do to get the word out.
This is very true. Now, something you mentioned there I thought was really cool because I chat with a lot of bands who have a mix engineer in the group or whatever, recording engineer in the group, and I don't want to say it's a tough business to get into, but you got to hit the pavement, to build up your roster with quality bands, not just good sounds, but quality bands, and get the word out. So take us through that maybe for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, anyone that's been doing this for a little while will tell you that kind of word of mouth is the biggest thing that's going to work in your favor when you're trying to get any kind of business like this off the ground. When you're in the creative industry and you're doing something that is a service for people, but at its core is something creative. That's going to be fueled by people just hearing what you do and thinking it's cool and wanting to work with you. So I've been lucky in the way that my own band, The Stranger, our music's been out there for a little while, and people hear what I do and hear what I've written and hear what I've produced and all that kind of stuff, and oftentimes want to come and work with me because of that. So I've had this sort of core sort of springboard, if you will, for a lot of my producing stuff. But the more bands that you work with, it starts to get out there, and eventually you just start hitting critical mass where people just start hitting you up out of the blue. It's that thing where you're doing all right when strangers start to contact you, right? Because it's like you start out, you've got your band, and then your friends' bands, and then their friends' bands, and that kind of stuff. And then when people hit you completely out of the blue, you're like, "Oh, right, okay, I guess, I guess I've got something going here that people seem to value." So,
I feel the same way with my podcast. As soon as I start getting spam on YouTube, I'm like, I think I'm getting there.
Yeah, that's right, man. It's weird, these things that matter to us for validation, but It matters. It matters.
Yeah, it's true. And then you get other points as well. Like, maybe did you have the issue of asking for money? Like, yeah, sure, just get me a pizza. I'll do it for free. Or,
No, I never really quite did that. Like, I think I've done a couple of free things here and there over the years, but only when it was just like a friend that was kind of in dire straits, and I was just like, whatever, I got a day free or whatever. For the most part, it was just like I just started out charging not much. Like my first serious album project was the first album I did for a band called Seraphic. I did their first album. I just charged them a flat fee of, I think it was either $2,000 or $2,500 Australian. But that, when all was said and done, once we'd recorded drums, bass, guitars, piano, vocals, harmonies, all that kind of stuff, and I'd mixed the whole thing, I think I worked it out, and I was getting about $4 an hour. So it's like, it's just your classic kind of starting out thing. But gradually over the years, you start, you kind of get to a point where you go, okay, I actually want to take this seriously and see it as a career, and I have to start charging enough to at least keep a roof over my head. And that's sort of where I'm right now. So yeah, it's, I'm not going to lie. Like I've still got a long way to go, just like anyone in this business really, but it's, it's at a point now where actually I'm starting to charge something that actually makes me feel like it's worthwhile. So that's a good feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Groovy. Now, I guess one of my next questions is, because up here on the site looking for a modern hard-hitting metal production, and immediately I'm like, genius, because either I am or I'm not. And
Yeah.
if I'm not, then I go somewhere else. What is a modern hard-hitting metal production? What does that mean?
Well, I mean, I look, essentially what I'm trying to do there is just speak to bands, right? Mm-hmm. Because a lot of bands don't really know what they want. Like they'll have a lot of ideas about what they think they want and how they think they're going to achieve it.
Right.
But ultimately, you know, this genre is about impact most of all. Like I talk to a lot of people who don't know really what metal is, or, you know, and they're like, oh, so what's the difference between, like, you know, rock and metal and that sort of thing? I'm like, well, really, it's just that you've got, you know, rock music, which is, you know, like loud drums and you know, driven guitars and all that kind of stuff. But metal takes it to this whole other level where you're impacting people in a much more intense sort of way. And I think anyone that's, you know, that's created music in this genre that wants to make a riff that really slams and make people's head, you know, make people nod their heads and that sort of thing. Ultimately, what they're after is impact. Mm-hmm. And so, obviously, everyone's got their own way of going about that, and everyone's probably got their own idea of exactly what that means. But when I think impact, I think hard hitting. You know what I mean? I just think that thump in my chest like that, just like, oh man, that's sick, right? So that's kind of that's what I'm going for there. Yeah.
Yeah. I've had people ask me that, and I just say room mics. Rock music has a lot of room mics. You use the direct mics as pepper. Metal's the exact opposite of that.
Exactly. Actually, yeah, that's a really good way of putting it.
And
what's good though is I think in a lot of recent productions and stuff in metal, I am seeing people start to use those room mics a little bit more. They're starting to matter a little bit more, especially when it comes to like snare sounds and that kind of thing, which I sort of like, you know what I mean? I think metal's gone through several stages. Like it started out very raw, which is basically coming straight out of the punk scene, right? Like in the like early 80s and that kind of stuff, you know, with Metallica and the thrash scene and all that sort of stuff. And then it sort of like had this sort of interesting sort of mid period in the 90s with bands like Pantera and everything, where production they were starting to wrap their head around what that meant. And then you had this kind of golden age of production in the early thousands with nu metal and that sort of stuff, where they were in this sort of like, they were still using a lot of the analog stuff, but there was the digital stuff coming over as well. And then sort of after that, you just had this insane reliance on samples, right? Just samples everywhere on everything all the time. Everything sounded artificial. Every snare sounds like it's a cannon, that kind of thing. And look, that's a sound, and people still go for that, and I think that's really cool. But I'm starting to see people getting a little bit sick of that, because you can only hear that, you know, you can only hear Slate kick 10 so many times before it's like you want to hear something a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's, you know, there's a lot of producers that are starting to really value that, and they're sort of the ones that I tend to, you know, put on some distant mountain top somewhere as the ultimate goal to strive for. So yeah,
beautiful. What was I going to say? I was going to say something else, and then I didn't.
I cut you off. I'm sorry, man.
No, it's okay. It's beautiful. As we're chatting about getting the word out, we're chatting about impacting, metal being impact, and that using all those, you know, snare samples and kick samples and all that, especially like metalcore, like 2005-ish, whatnot, you know, 7 snare samples in your drop or whatever. Like that's the whole reason for that, so that you can really just drive that impact home. And, you know, listening back now, a lot of it does sound completely ridiculous, and it probably did even then too.
Yeah. But that was the point, I guess, you know, like, but you know, that's, what I really like is that we, so I think people tend to look on the past with rose-colored glasses, like especially when it comes to things like preamps and analog gear and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think there's definitely something there from the past that was wonderful and that's worth hanging on to. But at the same time, I think it's also worth mentioning that like the whole world has just gotten so much better at production. You know what I mean? Like if you listen to some, like there's a lot of, like there's some really incredible production from like the 60s, 70s, 80s and stuff. Yeah. But a lot of it was actually pretty bad by today's standards. Like, you know, we've just gotten better at doing this stuff in the same way that it's like, you know, like muscle cars from the 70s were cool, but cars today are better cars. You know, they operate better. They use less gas. They, you know, they less fatalities, all these kinds of things. We're better at making cars. We're better at production.
But that's not what's fun about driving, Kalen. What's fun about driving?
Yeah, I know, and I like to drive fast all the time. I'm that asshole that still thinks he's 18 every time he gets in the car.
Well, you know, the funny thing is, I've been listening actually to more nu metal lately than I think I ever have in my life, and that's all my high school years, which is funny. I just kind of avoided it, skirted around it at the time. As best as I could. And now I'm listening back to it and I'm really appreciating it because when you listen to a Korn record from 1996, that's them. There's no samples. There's no MIDI bass. There's no time alignment. You know, when they're going for that, they want it to sound like it's exploding. You can hear the preamp overloading. You can hear everything. They're just going for it. And now, in retrospect, 20 years later, I just find it really refreshing to listen back to that stuff and go, whoa, this is a real band. Not to say that there isn't a real band going forward, right? But
yeah. No, I know exactly what you mean. And that's sort of what I was alluding to earlier when I said that we're sort of moving back out of the sample heavy arena into trying to get something a little bit more natural and a little bit more real. Yeah. Because it's like, I think a lot of musicians and a lot of bands, a lot of producers are starting to sort of crave that again. But the thing is, it's like we learned so much in the process that we'll never go back to that style of production. You know what I mean? It will be a new thing that will be natural in its own way, but we'll kind of take some cues from there. So, like, you know, I mean, one of the people, there's kind of two producers that I really look up to in this regard. The first one is a guy called Jens Bogren. I don't know if you're familiar with Jens.
Fascination Street Studios in Sweden, baby.
That's the one. Yeah, he is, as far as I'm concerned, basically as good as you can get as far as metal production goes. And he's done everything from, you know, the really kind of analytical sounding, you know, mixes with like Arch Enemy and that kind of stuff. But, you know, especially in recent years, like he's really made a massive focus on trying to have a really natural sound. Like he doesn't use a lot of samples. He doesn't, you know, he works to try and make it sound like it's a band you're hearing playing in a room. And I really, really love that. I really appreciate that. Like, you know, he mixed the latest Catatonia album. Sounds freaking incredible. The latest Caligula's Horse album. Obviously he's done, you know, in my opinion, Opeth's two best albums. You know, all these sorts of things.
Sepultura's latest album. I mean, it's about a year or two old now, but Quadra. He did Quadra.
That's right. And I think that's, you know, these albums are so good and we love them so much because they do just sound like bands. They don't sound like they've been edited within an inch of their life and that sort of thing. And the other one is like, you know, I almost hesitate to mention him, but he is so incredible. And I say I hesitate to mention him because he's so popular right now, and that's Nolly. Adam Nolly Get Good, you know, like he's just everywhere. You can't ignore what he does. But once again, I really respect him because once you learn about how he does a full mix, like if he was involved in the drum tracking, like if he set up the you know, the drum production, generally the only samples that he'll use will be a very light blend on the kick drum, and only for consistency, not to change the sound or anything, just to make sure that the kicks are like even in dynamics. But the rest of it is, you know, no samples at all. It's just that, and they still sound so incredibly cohesive and tight and wonderful, but it sounds like a band playing as well as a band can possibly play. And I really, really respect that. I mean, I've had to use a lot more samples than I wanted to on previous mixes and that sort of stuff, you know, and a lot of that's, unfortunately, you can't get around that sometimes if you, for example, working with a drummer that doesn't know how to do a rim shot, or like, you know, vocalists that can't really sing in tune and these sorts of things. Like, you know, that's just a reality of working with bands. And I've no doubt that I'm going to have to do a lot of that in my future. But every time I work with a band who's got the skill to pull it off, I'm going to be making them sound like them and no one else. And that means that just using as little trickery and samples as possible. So,
yeah. Just recently I was working with a vocalist and she sang something and I said, okay, in order for this to be industry standard, we're going to have to pitch correct it and time align it. And she was okay with that. And then I said, and if you want, after I do that, I can do it egregiously and then you can practice to that and then you can sing it again. And she was like, no, don't do it egregiously. I don't want to sing it again. So she was actually she was okay with that. But that was kind of rare. A lot of singers I find are very much like, no, I don't need that. You do. So if you don't want it, then you're going to have to work. And you went back to some great recordings from back in the day, and there's a lot of crap ones out there. But if I think of like Creedence Clearwater Revival, that is a tight band on tape, baby.
Oh yeah, man. Oh yeah. And like, that's the thing, like and even back to like the Motown days and that sort of stuff was obviously where Clearwater came from. But like, you know, it always comes back to that same thing, which is just, if you get it right at the source, if you have great musicians playing tightly, it's hard to make it sound bad at the end of the day. You know?
Yeah. So that's there you go. People out in rock metal podcast land listening in or watching on YouTube, if you want to sound great, you got to be great.
Yeah, it's so true. You can't polish a turd, man. No. And like,
you could, it'd just be a shiny turd.
Yeah, that's right. And you get pretty dirty in the process. But what you mentioned before about that conversation you had with that vocalist, that's I'm going to be honest, it's a little bit more transparent than I have a tendency of being. Like, normally when I work with a vocalist, it's like I'll work to get them as close to the ballpark as I can. But usually within an hour or so of working with a vocalist, you kind of get a sense of what they're capable of. And so at that point, what I really care about is the delivery and the emotion, and I'm less concerned about the pitch, because it's like, I'm fucking, sorry, I don't know if I can swear, I'm amazing in Melodyne. It's like, I know what I'm doing there. And so it's like, you know, unless they're really, really out, I know I'm going to be able to make it sound natural and, you know, like they just sung well in tune and that sort of thing. So all I really care about is like, do I believe it? Like, and that's one of the things I like to say a lot when I'm working with a vocalist. It's like, yeah, it wasn't a bad take, but I didn't really believe it, you know, and that seems to kind of spark something, and they're like, oh yeah, right, and generally we can get it from there. So, and then I'll be like, oh, you know, I'll pitch correct a few notes here and there and that sort of thing, and they're like, yeah, that's fine, and then I'll go through and, you know, generally it'll be more than just a few notes, but I'm really straight up about harmony vocals. I'm like, don't worry guys, I'll be pitch correcting these within an inch of their life. So, because that's the thing about, like, you know, harmony vocals are really there, unless you're intentionally making them a feature, they're there more to be flavor than anything. And so it's like, you know, it doesn't matter if they, you know, sound like they've been auto-tuned.
Yeah.
Well, but that's just my approach.
Yeah. No, harmonies, you can iron those things out like crazy. To the point where it doesn't even sound like anything anymore.
Yeah, pretty much. It's just another instrument in a way at that point.
Yeah, exactly. They have a different purpose at that point. And even then, finding a vocalist who knows how to switch from lead to harmony is a different vocal style altogether.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's like, I've worked with one or two vocalists in my time that could do that. But for the most part, when I'm working with a band, I usually take it upon myself to sort of to come up with most of the harmonies and coach them pretty heavily through that process, because I was very lucky. So from when I was a little kid, I come from a pretty musical family. Everyone in my family either sings or plays an instrument of some kind. And my dad has a really, really good ear for pitch. And so we'd all be singing in the car and everything, and like I'd be singing, my dad like, Kalen, you flat, like this sort of thing, or that was a bit sharp there, mate, that sort of thing. And so, you know, when I was a little kid, so And at the time I was just like, I was grumpy about it. But like, I'm really grateful now, because now I have. It's like, I don't have perfect pitch. That's something you're born with.
Yeah.
Rick Beato's done some amazing videos about that. But I have basically perfect relative pitch, and that's allowed me to get really creative with harmonies. So it's like, if I'm driving along in the car, just listening to music or whatever, like, it's something I do all the time, where I'll just start singing a harmony to the main vocal when there isn't one. And doing that for years and years and years has meant that I've built up quite a facility when it comes to layering harmonies and getting interesting with chord structures and harmonic structures that that can really underpin the vocal in a nice way. And I think a lot of the artists and vocalists I've worked with usually haven't delved into that stuff too much, because they always, when they're singing live, they're only singing the main line and all that kind of thing. So a lot of them are very happy to kind of hand that off to me and have me just tell them what to do the whole way through. But every now and again, when you get to work with someone that really knows what they're doing, that's lovely, because you can just sit back and hit record, and it's great.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Reminds me of the scene from Step Brothers, where the rich son, the successful rich son, is in the car with his family, and they're all singing, and he's like, I paid for vocal lessons, sing it right, or something. And yeah.
All right. I never saw that one song, man. It's great in my head.
It might bring back memories. Who knows?
Yeah.
Very cool. Now,
yeah.
So we've chatted about, as a producer, getting the word out, how to make impact with your music. Something else was great was making someone believe your music, which I think if we can wrap up a couple of things that we chatted about today, it's what's in front of the microphone. Is the source good? And if the source is good, I believe what you're saying, and I'm captivated by what you're doing, then we're going to forgive the fact that you might be a little flat, or you're a little sharp, or whatever. And if the style of music dictates, or the record label dictates, then we can fix that in the computer. But as long as I believe what you're doing, what's in front of the microphone, then we're good. I have a whole bunch of really silly questions here, like, Kalen, what is producing? Kalen, what is mixing? What is mastering? But we spent a good amount of time chatting, I think, a little bit about that. Is there anything in particular that you wanted to get out there that maybe, I don't know, a common question or a common gripe that you have that, like, hey, by the way, bands, here's this. Don't, if you have a $500 budget, please don't show me Metallica's Black Album.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're recording in your bedroom, please don't show me Metallica's Black Album. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it, man. Look, the thing is, I'm that guy that will work my ass off regardless of what the budget is. Like, purely for my own selfish reasons, like, I can't have something that doesn't sound as good as I can possibly make it leave my studio. But man, I can't believe this. It's a conversation I have to have so often. But convincing band members to come in with fresh strings, never played, that day, fresh, straight out of the packet, especially for bass guitar, and fresh heads, batter heads for the drums, like, it's unbelievable how difficult that conversation is, and how often I have to have it, and how often I have to say, no, we have to do this. It's like, unless you want the album to sound like crap, or for me to replace everything so it's not what you played, then we have to do this. And it's just like, I get it. It's like budgets are getting tighter and tighter. Most musicians, unless you're, a much bigger band and it's a label project and that sort of stuff, like, it's coming out of their own pockets and they want to, save money wherever they can. It's like, I get it. But, once again, you cannot polish a turd. Like, if you're going to put, like, especially, it seems to matter most on bass guitar and toms. Like, because you can, snares, it's not great, but you can work with it. Guitar, rhythm guitars and that sort of stuff. Again, it's not great, but you can brighten them up. But with a bass guitar, after even an hour or two, they've lost that lovely, clanky, high-end, wonderful thing that allows you to blend it in with the guitars so nicely. And like with toms, they just sound like, mud. So it's anyway. Point is, this is I'm having this rant a lot lately, man. But it's just if you want it to sound good, bring your best stuff to the recording and bring fresh strings and fresh heads, please, thank you. That's sort of my one massive gripe. Beyond that, most people are pretty cool.
That's cool, man. Speaking of Metallica's Black Album, they changed their heads every song. They would take sometimes several times in a song.
If you got the budget to do it, man, do it, right? Like, that's the dream. I mean, it takes a lot in terms of like drum tuning and that sort of thing, but oh god, it's so worth it. Oh, on the topic of drum tuning, like really getting that dialed in, like really learning how to how to tune a drum kit well, has been the number one thing over the last, I'm going to say 2 years, that has just completely turned my productions around. Because in my mind, there is nothing more satisfying than perfectly tuning up, 3 or 4 toms and a snare to exactly the notes and the pitch that you decide, and hearing them. Oh, it's just the best thing in the world. It's better than sex. So, learn to tune drums. If you don't know how to tune drums, there's a lot of really good information out there. Look it up. It's so worth it. Do it.
Beautiful. All right, Kalen, thank you very much for coming on. We chatted about you as a producer, getting the word out, impacting with your music, making someone believe your music, being a tight band, having all of your turds not ready to be polished. You're going to bring other things to be polished.
Leave the turds at home.
Leave the turds at home, which, change your strings so they're new strings until change them out as often as you need to. Change your heads, tune your drums properly. I would also even recommend bringing several different cymbals, because maybe the ride cymbal doesn't work that you play live with, or your hi-hats don't work that you play live with. Bring different sticks, bring different guitar picks. Guitar picks can make a massive difference on what's going on there.
I've got a massive bag full of every kind of pick you can imagine. So I just hand them to them. Use this. Yep, cool. You're done.
Boom. Sweet. Yep. All right. Wow. Kalen, thank you so much for coming on to the Rock Metal Podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me, man. It was a good chat. I enjoyed it.